Well, it's nostalgia time now on MTTV. We're looking for people who go back a few years, should we say like that, with Andy Wint, who's writing a brand new book all about the days, the 50s, 60s, when all the bands in the Isle of Man were doing their thing.
Yeah, from the start of the 1950s right to the end of the 1960s. I'm looking for the people who were in bands, the places where bands used to play, the people behind them, cafes, jukeboxes, everything to do with popular culture in the 50s and 60s.
So why are we standing outside Harmony Homes / Java Lounge?
Well, because people of a certain age will remember that this used to be Burton's, and above Burton's was where the Manx Jive Club used to be. One of the many places here in Douglas where young people used to go and watch young people playing music, and that was a revolution. It sounds a bit twee now, but back in the 1950s and 60s, to actually have young people playing their own music was a bit of a revolution. Prior to that, there'd been big bands, 15, 20-piece orchestras. Now you suddenly had 3 or 4 young kids with rudimentary technology playing music. It was a social revolution.
And you remember these days?
I was told by older people on the Isle of Man. I remember the 1960s, and right across the era, right across the years, the memories come flooding back because people remember when young people, and again, I stress young people, had fun for the first time. At the end of the Second World War, young people started getting money in their pockets, and they were taken notice of. There were young fashions, there was young music, and there was a philosophy and a feeling that actually you could have a go, you could have a good time, and you could provide the music.
Okay, well, we're going to look at a couple more places down Strand Street that are of interest for people who remember those days. But as I say, we're looking for people to get in touch with you, especially with pictures, I suppose, and memories.
Pictures and memories. Well, the Holy Grail would be sound recordings, but back in the 50s and 60s, it was difficult. The technology was literally cutting edge. You could go to Colburn's just up the road and cut a disc. But recording bands, there were very few recording studios on the Isle of Man. So if we find some recordings, that's great. But if anyone has photos of bands they were in, or if they were boyfriend or girlfriend or brother or sister, they were in bands, get the photos to me, and I'd like to come out and talk to people. Along with the help from the Manx Heritage Foundation, we want to put people's recollections on record and set this in stone, because 60 odd years ago we need to get this down for posterity.
So we've moved down to Waterstones as it is now.
Waterstones as it is now used to be the Palais de Danse back in the 1950s and 60s, when at one point up there with a sprung dance floor, there were 2,000 people in. 2,000 people in for a tea dance and sometimes for a coffee dance in the morning. In fact, in 1958, a man called Basil Kircher was hired, and Basil brought what was called a progressive jazz group to play there. Progressive jazz was anathema, really. They had an orchestra there before doing tea dances, and Basil came in, and every Saturday, Basil used to put an enormous pair of congas around his neck and take 2,000 people in a conga out of this door, down Strand Street and Duke Street, and come back. 2,000 people. They paid about £1 a time, so there was a good take on the door. But that was symptomatic of what was happening in the Isle of Man. There was a fantastic presence of pop music that was coming through from a brand new generation right here.
And our final stop, Andy?
We're at Greensills Corner on the promenade, and in front of you can see a block of flats. But to a certain generation, they'll know that as the Rendezvous Cafe. On 3 levels, cafes and a beat club right at the top, where the groups used to struggle up 2-3 flights of stairs with equipment, get to the top and perform. It used to get sweaty, it used to get full of condensation, it stank of tobacco, but it was where beat music used to happen in the Isle of Man, right next of course to a beach where sometimes there were 35,000 people. So it was a revolution. And we need information from people who played the Rendezvous, who went to the Rendezvous, who enjoyed themselves there. There was a snack bar there as well, including something that, again, people of a certain generation will understand, the jukebox. It was a jukebox provided people with music they couldn't get anywhere else. And the guy who ran the Rendezvous, as well as several other cafes, was a man called Colin Kissack, and he had the concession for bringing jukeboxes to the Isle of Man. He put the records onto the jukeboxes, people paid money, and the circle was complete. This was the Rendezvous.